The views and opinions expressed in this podcast are those of the individual co-host and do not reflect the official policy or position of the Firearms Radio Network and or their employers. Viewer discretion is advised. This is especially true on our live shows.
Broadcast for shooters, hunters, and gun enthusiasts. This is the Firearms Radio Network. The bandwidth for this episode of This Week in Guns is sponsored by Patriot Patch Company. PatriotPatch.co.
Welcome to This Week in Guns. This show is brought to you by the Firearms Radio Network and Patriot Patch Company.
And this show offers commentary on the latest firearms industry news, information, and buzz. I'm your host, Shawn Heron, and we've got a very short panel. It's me and one other person tonight. That other person is an investigator, instructor all over the place, volunteer, and the owner and head instructor of MDFI. Please welcome Trek. Eric, you Trek. What's up, buddy?
What's going on, man? Good to be here.
Glad to have you, as always. So we were just talking about the weather because, apparently that's what people do. You said you had a ton of ice in your backyard?
Yeah, we're in the thaw. I can see about half of my dead grass, and the other half is covered by the Great Trexican Glacier.
That's good times. I could have worn shorts today, but we had a bomb cyclone last week, so the weather's just going nuts in this country.
I blame it on the Mueller investigation.
That 100% Russian collusion, and it affected the weather, not the election. Let's get started. Smith & Wesson moving its warehouse from Massachusetts to Missouri, and this is no real surprise to me when you continuously just pound on these companies and make things pretty difficult for them business-wise, but also extremely difficult for them publicity-wise, I think. They have no other choice. So clearly Missouri's offering them some tax incentives and things like that, but they're upping and they're leaving, and it's going to be a 633,000 square foot state-of-the-art facility. It's going to serve as their centralized logistics, warehousing, and distribution operation in Massachusetts. They're going to lose a bunch of people who aren't going in Missouri. They're going to hire 154 new workers. I think that's all good news. And the bad part, Eric, is that I don't think that anyone cares in Massachusetts. They probably see it as a victory.
Yeah, I'm sure they do, but you know what? Good for them, and that's what needs to happen. Magpul, Magpul is probably one of the most publicized, moves, and it's good when you have fertile grounds elsewhere. I mean, why in the heck would you hang out? You're helping out the economy in your local area, and they don't want it. Well, move somewhere else, and it's too bad for those that were good employees for the company that for whatever reason can't move. And I know that's a big undertaking. Mm-hmm. I hope they find gainful employment, but yeah, good for them.
Yeah, 100% agree. Some of the biggest news actually that we saw coming is that there was a temporary stay for the plaintiffs in the bump stock ban out of the 10th Circuit. So this is the one that was published by the Firearms Policy Foundation, GETIS, I'm not sure exactly what the name is, versus the BATFE. And this is for the ban of bump stocks. They were trying to get an injunction. The injunction was denied. Now a judge actually has granted a stay, but there's a caveat there. And this actually went into effect yesterday on March 26th. We're recording the show on March 27th. The caveat was that anyone who's named in the lawsuit or bona fide members of the organization that filed this lawsuit is covered. Meaning if you're a member of the Firearms Policy Foundation, which you can join for even $1, you would be covered by this limited stay. This isn't great. I mean, it's good news because we're not felons because we haven't destroyed bump stocks, but it's also not great news because it's probably temporary. They just kind of put it into place until the courts do their thing. I joined just to make sure that I'm sure that I was already a member of the Firearms Policy Coalition, but I did go to joinfpf.org and I joined there as well, just to make sure that I was 100% covered by this stay. Eric, what do you think?
Yeah, so this has been an interesting case, and the worst part that I always joke about this is I have to support the daggone bump stock because of this whole this case. I understand people want to have some fun with them, but the reality is we all know, critical thinking people know, that this thing is not a machine gun. It is a lawful loophole. It's a novelty item. There's no one in any serious nature that thinks that this thing is a mission capable piece of equipment, but someone wants to put it on the Ruger 1022 and go burn through a mag out there and post it on Instagram. Well, that's cool. But yeah, it's good that even temporary stay is good because I follow Adam Kraut good friend of mine, and the FBC. I talked to. It's nice to have Brandon's name right there in my phone, and every now and then I get the opportunity and the honor to talk to him about issues that are going on. But when you have the organization that's in charge of regulating these objects, and then we have a history of the same organization that, according to John Dodson, the guy that was the whistleblower on the ATF Fast and Furious organization, that says that for the most part, the ATF every day is just trying to justify its own existence by making ridiculous interpretations of a temporary stay, because when you look at how they're trying to machine gun, well, I think the newest thing, well, then my AR-15 is evidently a machine gun. My finger is evidently a machine gun if the bump stock is. So this is definitely a case to follow. And, that's good that there's a temporary stay, because hopefully a temporary stay means let's actually get to the bottom of the baloney that's going on. And everybody should be following it, because whether you support the daggone accessory or not, it's a slippery slope of opinions affecting federal law, and that's the biggest thing right there.
Yeah, 100% agree. Glad that they got the temporary stay. We'll see where it goes from there. Court strikes down assault weapons ban in Deerfield, Illinois. I think this is kind of an interesting one. Deerfield, they are in Illinois. Illinois does have preemption laws saying that cities and counties can't put in things that restrict gun laws. Deerfield said, you know what, we don't care. We're going to figure out a way around it. And they added it as an amendment to something that already existed, so they didn't actually have to pass it or anything like that. But circuit court judge ruled that they had overstepped their authority, and when they enacted a ban on assault weapons 5 years after the Illinois legislature declared such regulations the exclusive power of the state, and issued a permanent injunction blocking the village from enforcing its ordinance. So I think that's good news. It's good to kind of see laws work like this. I mean, in the grand scheme of things, it's incredibly unimportant, and who really cares? But this was a city council that was way over their purview, and I'm glad to see them get slapped down. What do you think?
Yeah, well, I remember when this came about, and you and I probably had the same reaction, like, well, this isn't going to hold water. The fact is though, this is the terrifying part. We have individuals in positions of power that violate the oaths that they take. And we've seen from all the way up on high in this country to down to the dude that digs the ditches on our local city street, where corrupted power can, I mean, anyone that had been caught from the time that they implemented this to now, to this permanent modification to the ruling, lives get ruined. Law-abiding citizens' lives get ruined for having that pesky shoulder thing that goes up, for having a threaded muzzle device all of a sudden makes it a quote-unquote assault rifle. And as anything, facts once again tell us that it's the individual action of assault, not the actual firearm, that makes it deadly. Yeah, it's good, because it's just it's a feather in the cap for the way that the Constitution is supposed to protect the individual American. So, yeah, good on them. But the worst part is we're going to see about 15 more of these from places that haven't had that ruling against them.
And it's funny that you mentioned that, because I was just going to bring it up, and Alex just mentioned it in chat that, if this is overstepping the bounds, how is Boulder, Colorado not doing the exact same thing? So Colorado has preemption laws. Boulder has put in stupid things just like Deerfield did. And I guess, I'm not an attorney, nor am I a man who would be considered intelligent by any matter of the word, but it seems to me like this is precedent. I don't know if that's exactly how precedent works, but with the judge saying that Deerfield can't do it, hopefully we'll see the same thing in Boulder, Colorado as well.
Yeah, no, and you're absolutely right. I think it will. And one of the best parts that we see about situations like this, at least over a majority of stories, is especially the elected law enforcement, the sheriffs in the counties around this country who took an oath of office, that oath to protect and defend the Constitution of these United States against all enemies, foreign and domestic. We have sheriffs that are saying, well, you can make whatever daggone law you want. However, we are the ones that you're going to call when some guy's out there with his bump fire stock, and we are not going to go harass these law-abiding citizens because, in our opinion, the law is unethical, unmoral, and unconstitutional. And so that's always good, because that sort of protects the individuals in that gray area being that the city council says it's illegal, Constitution says it's not illegal, and we're waiting for a judge. Well, if the sheriff won't go arrest somebody in that mire of waiting to find out if it's truly going to be upheld. That's good, because a lot of lives don't get affected. So yeah, well, hopefully it is. I mean, this is the kind of stuff you hope for, where these decisions all over the country will be overturned.
Definitely. The next story is a little bit dramatic, and it's one that you and I started to talk to before the show. And I was like, oh, you know what? Let's save it. So rats tourniquets and their creator get exposed for shady practices. So first off, what a rats tourniquet is, it was created by a guy named Jeff Kirkland, I believe. Kirkland, one of those things. And it's called the rapid application tourniquet. And what it is, it's an elastic band that has a buckle on one end. And they are quick to apply, but they've received a lot of criticism from people in the know, saying that they're completely ineffective in certain kinds of bleeding that you would need to apply a tourniquet to. And a lot of people don't use them. Me personally, I do carry a couple rats as backups to the couple of cats that I carry. And the reason is that they do have a couple of different applications. And I've been able to verify the full occlusion on my arms with Doppler, and it works, but it doesn't work on my leg. So, depending on what it is, it was always a backup to my backup to my backup. But I guess I'll stop there as far as the efficacy goes. From that point, maybe a year, maybe 2 years ago, they were advertising that they were approved by the Committee for TCCC. And the Committee for TCCC is an organization that meets about once a year. It's basically a bunch of rock stars in battlefield medicine, and they meet once a year. And they come up, they basically figure out what is working, what is not working for our armed forces and our TCCC. And then they make recommendations based on products and procedures and all the different teachings that you can do there. What the rats company, the company that puts out rats, had done was they had registered a shell corporation. I think it was called USTCCC, and said that they were approved by USTCCC, which of course was led people to believe that for some reason they were approved by the Committee for TCCC, which they clearly were not and never will be, is my guess. So that was some drama a while back. Now the new drama is it turned out that there was a website that had popped up called Evidence-Based Medicine, and they were publishing studies and different articles and things like that were basically trying to throw aspersion on the CATS tourniquet, the combat application tourniquet. And they were citing different parts of studies showing that cats are ineffective, and then basically selling rats tourniquets on top of them. Cats are ineffective, rats are awesome. And people did some reverse DNS searches and lookups to see who had registered this evidence-based medicine website. And they had gone back and done a lot of detective work, digital forensics, if you will. And they realized that it was basically the guy who had invented the rats. So he was out there, publishing this website, putting out fake news about the CATS tourniquet, all in an effort to sell more of the rats tourniquet. People called him out. He argued with a bunch of people online. I think it's really crappy behavior. That is on the heels of other really crappy behavior for a tourniquet that its efficacy, I would say, in my personal experience, is less than 100% adequate. Eric, I know this is you've kind of heard of all this.
I'm so glad we waited.
I know.
That was great. That was great. Yeah. So firearms instructor that says they're a cop, but they've never been a cop. They could probably still teach a class, right? Probably happens. You say that your tourniquet works and people bleed out. That's about as bad as it gets.
Yep.
Yeah. So a long time ago, I am an end user. I've had Army Combat Lifesaver, Air Force medical training, my military law enforcement medical training. My mentors are Dark Angel Medical. So when Carrie, Mike, and Ross, when they talk, I listen, I take a knee. And so the rats came out, they've been out for a while. And what I like about those guys is they'll tell you what's the best, and they'll tell you, well, hey, if you don't have the best, let's turn that frown upside down and let's try to make it work. So I was informed about the USTCCC saying that it was certified, and that being kind of shady a while back, which should give everyone a moment of pause. I mean, why not just get in front of the experts, and then we can go ahead and get it certified, or we can get feedback from those guys and then make modifications to make sure that it actually can save lives. And as you mentioned, it can get occlusion. You can get on certain body parts, you can't get occlusion. And I'm not going to tell a lie. I had one, still have. I got a couple of them around. What I liked about it was you could wear it down a pant leg. You could put the belt loop and just wear it down a pant leg with a pair of pants, and it was really easy, pull it out. But then when these guys tell me, they're like, hey, there's some concerns of effectiveness, but you could use it on a small child like an infant or a canine. I'm not going to throw them out, but I also know that I'm going to stock up my bag with cats, and soft teas, and things like that. So yeah, that's going another step. It's pretty shady to do the UST-CCC. The worst part is, pretty much every marketing out there, we get things like that. But yeah, the spreading the bad intel about something that could save somebody's life. This is my first time hearing about that. I always, as a previous investigator, I always tell people, let's wait for the report of investigation to find out the true facts of the case. But based on the info that you're saying, and if that is in fact truthful about this coming from the source of a competitive product that's inferior, that right there should be that's criminal in my mind. That is an absolutely criminal offense, because somebody could die, and it's probably what we're seeing right now. And I'm not a scientist, but when we have sites that are clearly putting out disinformation about vaccinations, and right now we have a disease that should have been eradicated, but now there's a county in the United States of America where the police are checking for vaccination records before you go into a public place. That's a lot of disinformation that's causing and costing lives. So yeah, that's pretty bad. And I'm glad we waited to talk about it, because it's something. But you know what? It's something everybody should listen to. And I hope if anybody's got a rat out there, that they start spreading the word. Don't throw them out. I mean, hell, you could use it to lash down your tarp on your freaking RV if you needed to. But yeah, when it comes to saving someone from hemorrhage, definitely go with something that's been proven by the experts.
Yeah, 100% agree. So there's been a lot of fallout from this. Medical gear outfitter Skinny Medic, he actually took a look at all the data. He is no longer selling rats tourniquets, and it was definitely something that he had sold a lot of in the past. He knew the weaknesses, and that was something no longer available on the website. He removed them from all the classes he teaches. He and I just launched a new podcast on the Firearms Radio Network called the Civilian Medical Podcast. You can find it at firearmsradio.tv, where we talked about this in detail quite a bit. And it's just, yeah, it's bad. It's bad. And it actually could lead, I think, to people dying. And
yes,
that's pretty tough. So bad behavior. A lot of people are pretty upset about it. And I totally 100% agree with them.
Yeah.
Next up, Nebraska bill would provide a tax credit for firearms training. So first off, I'm just going to say, I don't really want training to be something that the government tells us we have to have, right? Because I don't want more control on this stuff. I want less. But offering a tax incentive, I don't know. It might seem a little bit interesting to me to have something like that. So it looks like it's going to cost them about $660,000 out of their budget. And I just think it's a good thing. People who take gun training receive a tax incentive. They can do it once every 5 years. And, nothing about that sounds bad to me.
Yeah, you're right. As a libertarian, a staunch libertarian, there's nothing that irks me more than the Supreme Court has already said that never a fee shall be affixed to the exercising of a right. Yet we just seem to allow that to happen all over this country with the CPL. Here's a fee. Here's a fee just to put a millimeter of cloth over the top of your gun, right? So it's too bad that it has to happen, but heck, turn the frown upside down. If you're going to charge people for an application fee to carry a gun concealed, give them a tax break. And you know what? I imagine if they crunch the numbers and a bunch of people that have far more training, there's probably a lot less liability out there. It might even directly translate in the fact that the criminals in Nebraska are like, holy crap, people are getting a tax break. That means they're going to train more, which means I have less people to prey on, which means actually less good people in the hospital with medical bills. There might be some right now, some CPA is just giggling because it might actually work out in the favor of the state. But, good on them. What that does tell me in the bigger picture, it just means that the powers that be in Nebraska are pro-ish. They're leaning more towards the pro-Second Amendment. I would say, hey, let's go another couple steps further and just say, well, there's no need for a tax break because we're not going to tax you on anything that has to do with the right to keep and bear arms. But kudos for them doing far more than most states. And so, yeah, that's who knows. I hope it's not just a political stunt, but we'll see. We'll see where it comes from that.
Yeah, I agree 100%. It wouldn't be much. It'd be, I think, $100 is what I read in the article. But, I think encouraging people to get training is good. On the other hand, I don't know. I haven't had enough time to think about it to figure out what the slippery slope is on that. Alex over in the chat said, not a fan of being taxes used as an incentive for anything, be it gun training or quitting smoking.
Oh, absolutely.
Quitting smoking, that's a little bit, I don't know, that one's tough to verify. So I would kind of probably be against that. But I don't know, giving citizens back their own money, I kind of always go for that. But I don't know, maybe it's a good idea, maybe it's a bad idea.
It's interesting if you look at it. You have powers that there's no way that certain legislators can actually overcome the fact that the other legislators are going to vote in a fee, $100 fee for a seatman annual, or and that might be their way of finding a way to not. They can't overcome that, but what they can do is, hey, we're going to try to get you as much as your money back. And you're right, Alex, is that right? There shouldn't be. But sometimes we have to take small victories to keep us going towards final adherence to the Constitution, which has been long since gone. And I think that this is just this is a positive movement, especially when I keep hearing about how they want to tax sodas. I'm 39, turning 40, and I'll tell you, my metabolism is nowhere near it used to be. To run marathons, I rode across the country, and I know that soda goes right around my midsection. But no one should have to freaking tax me if I want to drink too much soda. And this is the stuff where we're getting so far away from the Constitution of what the federal government is supposed to be. Let's take this little bit for a win right now, but let's trust but verify. Let's keep our eyes on it.
Yeah, agreed. We'll see if it passes too. You never know.
Sure.
Next up, Alabama Family Dollar clerk fights off sword-wielding robbers with guns. So this Family Dollar has been robbed about 15 times in the last few months, and I don't know. There's something weird about that. If I was thinking of places where I could get the most money in a robbery, I probably wouldn't think of the dollar store, but I could be wrong. So two people walk in with swords. The manager has clearly been robbed many, many times recently, runs to the end of the aisle, talks to a lady named Precious, one of the employees, says, "This is why I have a gun. This is what I'm going to do," goes, confronts them. They run away. Clearly not fans of Conan or, what is best in life or anything like that. And I don't know, you don't really hear of people being robbed with swords. I just thought this one was so weird that it might be worth it. But the gun, always stronger than the blade, at least in this case. What do you think?
And I just was going to say that if you threw in a Lord Elrond in there, I was going to wonder with Precious and the ring and one power to rule them all, maybe that's the dollar store that we need to be following. But yeah, but once again, we just had right after the New Zealand shooting, which I'm sure has been the topic of many a podcast out there. The very next day or the day after, we had University of Michigan put out a mass text saying, possible active shooter, run, hide, fight. And, the classic thing, of course, this is coming from the college campus where they won't allow you to carry a firearm in any way, shape, or form. And they've actually won the day to restrict. Even with preemption, they've been found that they can make people do that. But it was really funny to see a bunch of response on social media of these people that are all about the gun-free zone, but then said, "Run, hide, fight. What are we supposed to fight with?" And it's like, ding, 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 right there. So a gun is probably going to win against just about anything, and it's good to know that against a broadsword, a Glock will still rule the day. So that's awesome.
Yes, absolutely. I always say, or I've been saying lately, I should say, that I don't think it's about convincing the other side that they need guns. I think if we can just convince the other side that their life is more important than that of someone who should wish to take it from them, they'll come to the gun conclusion on their own. Because once you realize that your life is more important and no one else is going to take care of you, that you're there, you're responsible for yourself, and no one else is going to get involved, it's pretty easy from that point to be like, okay, what's the most effective means of defending myself? And clearly that's a gun. And people...
Yeah, you're right. And to me, it is one of the most terrifying things doing the job that I do. There's thousands, millions of people in this country that they don't value their life enough. I can't take a human life. And then you ask them, what about you? And they say, well, no. And it takes them until you say, what about your kids? And then the mama bear and the daddy bear come out. They say, no one's touching my kids. And it's like, if we could just get you to believe that your life's worth that too. So you're right. And you're right. It'll lead them to the best tool available.
Yeah, 100%. So anyway, don't rob the dollar store with swords, I think, is what we're talking about there. As an instructor, Eric, I know that you are very familiar with the Tooler drill. George Mann was recently killed while testing the Tooler drill. Him and a buddy were arguing about, can you cover this 21 feet? I guess, Eric, why don't you define what the Tooler drill is for us?
So it's the classic 21-foot rule that we heard about. I was about this in my first the 3rd Training Squadron at Lackland Air Force Base, Texas. And it just basically says there's a lot of people out there that say, well, if someone has a knife, you have to wait until they're within arm's reach. And basically, this drill just says that the average person, the average law enforcement officer standing still, an average American can cover the distance 21 feet by the time somebody can get their gun into play and get their hits. And so the best part that come of it is if someone is standing at a good distance with an edged weapon, you better be ready to freaking fight, because they can, even an out of shape American can cover that distance. And there's been many people that have thought that someone with a gun would not shoot them until they were close, and they found out that not only is it a drill that proves that you could be behind the power curve, it also proves very well in a court of law, because it's a tried, tested, and improved law enforcement defense for cops shooting people without guns but having edged weapons.
Yeah, 100%. So they decided that they were going to test it out. One of them pulled out their .357 revolver, emptied it, but didn't empty it fully. And then the other guy started to run at him, clearly doing the test. The guy drew, fired it, hit him in the chest. He died. This guy's now been arrested and charged with involuntary manslaughter and possession of a firearm during the commission of a crime. Man, just...
If only we had, and you know what, you and I'm looking off, gazing out the window. If one day we could have a technology, maybe airsoft, this thing called milsim, maybe a finger gun. I mean, maybe some sort of inert training weapon. If we could only find a way to possibly do this, where human life, consequence, somebody was negligent with a firearm. It's just a dream, I know, but one day.
Yeah, one day maybe they'll invent things like that.
God, and here's the thing that's scary. And this is, we were talking right before he came on. The anti-gunners, my God, we can overcome them with facts. But this guy was a firearms owner. His friend was probably a firearms owner, and whatever the reason, they thought this was a good idea. And whatever the reason, now a good person is dead, and another person's life and their family's lives are ruined, and the public opinion takes us so many steps back. If they had just applied some critical thought, it's a tragedy. It's a tragedy, but it's one of those tragedies where everybody would have said, "You sure you don't want to think about this for just another 2 seconds?" And we'll probably come to a conclusion that doesn't involve you blowing your buddy's brains out.
Yeah, 100% agree. Just God, it's so avoidable, man. And now one lost their life, and the other one, their life is probably ruined, at least for a long time.
Absolutely.
Next article, LA police officer wants assistant chief charged for not helping him with a combative suspect. So I'm going to lay this down briefly, but there's a guy, he shows up at a party or something like that. And one of the guys starts being extremely combative. At that point, the assistant chief rolls up in his unmarked police car, gets out, steps out on the sidewalk. The perpetrator starts to become extremely combative with the cop, and they end up in hand-to-hand combat. The police officer in this case doesn't know that the assistant police chief is standing there on the sidewalk. They're wrestling. This officer is fighting for his life. I mean, this stuff can go bad so quickly, and he is fighting for his life. A backup officer rolls up right as the officer deploys a taser. They get the guy under control together. At some point, the assistant chief just slowly backs away, gets in his car, backs up, and drives off.
Wow.
The original officer still at this point doesn't know it. And then after they start, after everything gets processed and they start talking, the other cop says, "Well, why didn't the assistant chief help you?" And the original officer says, "Wait, he was there." There's dash cam footage of it all with the assistant chief just standing there in the background. When challenged on why this didn't happen, he said that he had his grandson in the car. And I just, what a coward. I there's no excuse for this for me. I'm being pretty judgy, I realize, but what do you think, Eric?
Yeah. Okay. So, you had to throw that curveball in there right at the end, right?
I know.
And so here's the thing. I go back to every time I hear stories, I yell at the TV. My beautiful better half, she says you get worked up too easy, but I I'm a big proponent. I have had to deal with reports of investigation. I always wait till all the facts are in before I make a final judgment. But here, let's take what we can away from the situation. I know of a good buddy of mine who has actual chest cam footage of his partner bailing on him during an officer-involved shooting. Of just bailing, and the guy's still a law enforcement officer, right? The guy that bailed on him. So this happens. It happens quite a bit across the board, from not only officers not giving backup when it's clearly, one, authorized, and two, your buddy's getting the raw end of the deal. But we also hear this, if we expand this a little bit, we hear that common complaint, and generally it's from people that aren't self-reliant, that say, well, where were the police? Where are the police? And this is the big thing in New Zealand. Well, they're lauding a 36-minute response time, and we've proven it in the United States of America. If the New Zealand shooting had happened down the street from us and it was a 36-minute response time, it wouldn't have mattered if the cops showed up. There's no legal precedent for. So the downside of this case, the guy, the department is going to decide whether or not the excuse of whatever he gave about his grandson being in the car, that's already been proved in the court of law. But at the same time, if he somehow stays on the force, that's there is, if he rolls up, you're still on your own. He's actually an empty uniform. So, personally, that's not going to fly. If you're right there and you can do some good, you got to do some good. You're charged by taking the badge, but circumstances can always change. But that's an important thing to note. Cops, they know that it's not a guarantee that somebody's there in a uniform is going to back them up. And they also, we as people need to understand that no one is coming to save us unless they want to. And that's a big thing to tack on the end of that, is want to.
Yeah, totally 100% agree. I'm going to pause just briefly. Eric, do me a favor, and over your video window, you're cutting out a bit again. Mouse over it, and then at the very top, there's like a cell phone signal indicator thing. Adjust bandwidth. You just drag it all the way to the left to voice only, and see if that helps.
Okay. How's that?
It's good now. We'll
cool.
see. We'll see if it continues.
Okay.
All right. Cool. All right. Let's get back into it. But yeah, I don't know. There is so much on this one that I'm just like, at some point, like, if that officer had died, what is the culpability of that assistant chief, whether it's personal, whether it's professional? It seems bad to me. And if you're driving around with your grandson in your car, maybe don't engage at all by getting out of the car and just kind of watching.
That would be my take. And it does. If you're off duty and you have loved ones, you have to, at a certain point in time, especially with if it's an 18-year-old kid in the car with me, I could be like, yeah, grandpa's going to hop out. You hot tail this thing down the road, and don't come back until I call you. You got a kid in a car seat. First of all, I'm not going to roll up, because if bullets start flying, it doesn't matter, So there's a lot of what ifs to this, but I sadly, there's probably no, and I'm not an attorney, but there's probably no criminal culpability. Even if the officer were to have died, it would have definitely been a bigger black eye in the department, and of course, trust the department by that individual, especially if he's in a position of power. But this is the danger of the precedent that's sent, that there's no duty to protect. And I doubt the Supreme Court would say that goes for your brothers in blue, green, and tan.
Yep. Agreed. Next story is another sad one. Country music singer killed by prop gun while filming video. So they were in his apartment recording a music video. They were using a real gun. It was a real gun being used as a prop. And just like we talked about with the Tueler drill death, they thought it was unloaded. It wasn't unloaded, and it killed the country music guy. Justin Carter is his name. And just, we complacency clearly kills. Several stories this week actually that kind of show that, but man, it's just sad.
Yeah, we have class in an NLTA, or non-lethal training ammunition environment, and we go through a 3-part check. It's an individual check, it's a buddy pat down, and it's a cadre pat down of the students, and then we go into a full protocol about leaving the sterilized area and how that works. And the reason we have to do this is not because I don't trust any of my students, it's because people keep getting killed every daggone year of people introducing lethal weapons into non-lethal or situations where there's not supposed to be. And it's like, for the love of God, I just used my cadre for the scenarios this week, and we just used NLTA weapons that are incapable of fire. They're incapable of firing live ammunition, and they have blanks. And the blanks sound like real gunshots, but you could put that thing right at my head, and it can't fire a projectile no matter what you try to do. If you have the budget, or you think you have the budget to do a country music video, you should have the budget to hire somebody. They have these armors, and it probably drives all of us crazy when we watch a movie with the worst gun handling, and they clearly, you know, they've got the scope on backwards. It's because they skipped having a professional armor who would have looked at you like, you know, what are you doing? And they're the ones that are supposed to make sure. So yeah, we have the technology now, guys. I mean, this stuff is inexcusable, regardless of the excuse. It's a tragedy that life gets lost, but no, there's no reason that should happen. I mean, I don't even. I hear stories in my state of, you know, CPL and the people leading classes bring live ammo into a classroom. Well, you're the instructor. If they're going to trust you to get this training, how is it live ammo finds its way into a dry classroom? We've got to do a better job, and we have to police our own. And tragically, we're seeing the consequences where lackadaisical behavior is not punished enough, or not punished is the wrong word, but it's not, people aren't held accountable enough. And we need to get to that point where we need to not worry about the government punishing people legally. We need to ostracize and make extinct inappropriate gun handling and irresponsible behavior by not allowing it, by basically ostracizing it from the very fabric of gun ownership. And that's horrible. And I only say this, I'm a little bit emotional. I've got a good friend of mine whose new brother-in-law is a special forces operator with United States Air Force pararescueman, you know, elite of the elite, just had to go home to a family funeral because his brother killed his wife sitting across the kitchen table cleaning his handgun. So here's a special forces guy with the highest training has to go home to console his brother who killed his wife cleaning a gun at a kitchen table. And it says, guys, we got to stop this stuff. It's ridiculous.
Yeah. Too much. Next story. New Zealand does what the killer wanted and bans guns. I've said it on a couple of shows that the most powerful individual in New Zealand is this murderer because they have bowed to his whims. And I've said this a lot, but I also draw a correlation to the bump stock ban. One person misused a bump stock. That's it. And suddenly we have all this stuff that's actually going on. The stay was just executed in that lawsuit by the Firearms Policy Foundation. And when you give these people this control, that encourages other people to do it because they see that this control and this power that these horrifying acts grant to the person who commits them, and they copy it because they also want that as well. So I don't want to spend a ton of time talking about all the specifics. At least I want to hear your opinion in full, but the specifics are that they're going to get rid of any military style.
The time for the mass and easy availability.
Military style assault weapons, magazines, accessories that can convert anything. It is far, it is broad, and it is overreaching. Eric, what do you think?
So it's interesting you say this, and I won't go too much of a diatribe, but this is a story I've been following quite a bit. And so just to get to the point that you're making, go back a little bit before they enacted this new, very knee-jerk reaction. Doing some research after this happened, and found out that the license for a firearm in New Zealand, it's sporting and hunting. Putting self-defense on your application will be an automatic nullification. So that would be interesting. And then we have they were reporting at the first few reports that it might have been multiple suspects. And then if you watched BBC, they started disappearing from the headlines. They weren't saying that they had changed their statement. They just started to disappear. And what we had was an 18-year-old who had been arrested for furthering the video, which is actual crime in New Zealand. But another individual had a rifle, a lawfully owned rifle, grabbed it, realizing nobody was doing anything, and ran towards the gunfire. He actually did not employ the rifle, but he was arrested and faces firearms charges because he took a sporting and hunting rifle for the use of defense of life and limb, which is actual crime in New Zealand. So what we see is, and right before this happened, the head of the police in New Zealand made a statement that I shared on MDFI that should terrify, frankly, anybody. And it was, he wanted to remind New Zealanders that the ownership of a firearm was a privilege and not a right. And so what we have, which is, it's an awful situation, but a beautiful thing. The beautiful thing is that when we have something like the bump stock ban, which is a load of crap, when we have these actions by individuals, we have politicians that, and I've said this time and time again, it's either gross ignorance or absolute intentional action. And I have a hard time believing that all these people with Ivy League educations are that stupid. So what I have to break it down to is that they use these to further political agenda. And so what we have is this knee-jerk feel-good reaction about the bump stock ban and the knee-jerk feel-good reaction that the New Zealanders are doing. The good thing is that we have organizations like the FPC and the FPF and Gun Owners of America and all these other different organizations that are saying, hey, our Constitution says right, not a privilege. But the dangerous thing is we keep seeing it whittled down. And yeah, I don't think we're playing into the hands, and this is the sad part, I don't think the government of New Zealand is playing into the hands of the shooter. I don't think our government plays in the hands. I think our government and their government wait for these opportunities to use them to further agenda. And that's because any critical thinking person would say, well, then we have to get rid of all cars because somebody's going to drink and drive and kill somebody. That would be the critical thinking. If you have to share that across the broad spectrum, and if we know that firearms are less likely to kill people versus alcohol and cars and aircraft, whatever, my hammers and things like that, then it would be simple to say, well, hey, they're outlawing everything else, so this makes sense, but they're not. They're going after threaded muzzles. They're going after barrel shrouds, and this, now you have to have a stupid California grip on your rifle, which doesn't do it in operation. It's sad. This is a story to follow, but unfortunately, if I'm a betting man, and I will be on this one, Australia had a mass shooting where a lot of people died, and that's why they're where they at. It was a very knee-jerk reaction, and you had scores of Australians just haphazardly willing to give up their blasters, not understanding the far-reaching consequences. So I think we're going to see that with the New Zealanders. There's not going to be much ho-hum, but one of the things I loved was, and I'm going to call out the FPC, was Brandon from the FPC responding to Senator Feinstein when she said, hey, the New Zealanders are doing it, we need to do it. And he basically responded kind of right up there with the nuts response from the Battle of the Bulge. He said, not a chance. He said, not a chance. And I think that was absolutely great. So yeah, sadly, I don't think we're playing into their hands. I think that they're just proving to be perfect case studies for them to use to further an agenda.
Yeah, very, very well put. Let's move into our I'm Offended segment and talk about a couple things down there. First off, Indiana teachers want a law to protect them from being shot during training classes. Well, here's the setup. Sheriff's Department goes into to a school with a bunch of teachers who have either volunteered or signed up to be part of this active killer training, whatever their action response, whatever you want to call it. And they were told when they signed up that they may be shot with simulated rounds. In this class, or I guess let's break it down here. When you're doing force on force and stuff like this, there's a few different things you can use. You can use airsoft, which is a 6mm plastic BB. There's some paintball guns that work really well. They're a 0.43mm powder filled or liquid filled paintball. And then you go into things like simunitions and UTM, which are actual cartridges and rounds with wax projectiles that come out and they hurt. All of these things hurt. Airsoft hurts. The paintballs hurt, but not as bad as simunitions and UTM. I actually got a broken finger using UTM, and it was broken for a long time. It took a while to heal just because, with your finger, you're moving it all the time. So the sheriff's at the end of this, they take the teachers into a room, put them up against a wall with their hands up in the air, and then they spray them with airsoft rounds, which it hurt. It absolutely hurt without question. I have no doubt about that. The teachers then came out and were complaining about it. And now the teachers union wants people to put in laws to protect them from doing this. And I'm like, well, here's my mind. Pain is a fantastic teacher. It will teach you a lot more. I think that this assassination that the sheriffs committed against these people was because the 5 physiological responses: fight, flight, freeze, posture, and submit. And submission equals death is what we always say. And by them submitting, they taught them a very valuable lesson that they'll probably never forget. It'll probably stick with them, even if they end up in a real active killer situation, because they'll remember that. They'll remember submission equals death. So as a learning experience, it was probably pretty great. I've never heard of this one. Eric, lay it on us.
Ooh, so I'm a UTM instructor, and I teach NLTA classes. The only concern I hear by the initial story is the lining up the teachers, putting their hands up and then hosing. If that was part of the bad guys line them up against the wall, and that was part of the scenario, and it was fight, flight, or freeze, that's different than, hey guys, go into this room, we're just going to giggle while we pelt you full of airsoft pellets. That I would have a hard time seeing a teaching point. But here's the biggest thing. This is a small microcosm of a far bigger issue. We are becoming pansies. And I'll come back to this. I know there are law enforcement agencies in the state of Michigan that no longer, because of complaints by officers to their unions, they won't take a taser hit. They're going to get qualified on the taser, and they're actually qualifying guys on these less than lethal systems that are not willing to take it themselves to understand the physiological and psychological effects. They'll go deploy them on other people. And it's the same with OC. I resigned from a reserve police department this past year because they pointed an unloaded gun at me in a classroom and thought that was okay when I brought that up the chain. But when I went through my 20th OC exposure with them, the most that they expected was to spray it on a latex glove and wipe it in one of my eyes. And all of their 19 hits that I received were full on the way they're supposed to be to understand what's going on and test this stuff out. And they were certifying guys by doing this. So going back to our story, it's this pansification of what's going on and it's such a great, discussion. I'm offended is what you called it.
Yeah.
So here are people that said, I'm a teacher, I'm responsible for young folks. They offered me the opportunity to go be armed, which comes with, you have a greater responsibility. And I'm not going into the Second Amendment. You're in an environment in which a missed round is probably going into a kid. So your situation is going to dictate you need to have a little bit more training before the state, who would be liable, is going to send you armed into a classroom. The only way to understand how to use this firearm in that environment is to have great manipulation training, because you need to know your fundamentals. You need to be able to hit what you're aiming at. You need to keep your gun up and running regardless of the situation. But then you have to go into force on force. You need to understand shoot, no shoot. You need to understand what it's like to be in a 360-degree environment. There is no more better way to reinforce stepping into an open doorway instead of clearing your corners or clearing your angles and taking the B's, as we call it. And the B's, as you said, they will remind you that you done messed up.
Yep.
And so that's part of the training. And if you're not willing, I guess in my mind, we as Americans, we have the right to be pansies. If you want to be a pansy, I've got a bruise on me right now from one. If you want to be a pansy, because you can't take a hit from an airsoft, from a UTM, or whatever, then you have no business being responsible for deadly force protecting kids. And it's okay, because there will be men and women who have the intestinal fortitude to take a couple B's to understand that, hey, I'm getting hurt, but I'm going to keep fighting. Or I'm going to use this as a learning lesson because I dug that corner the wrong way and I took a round. And maybe if I had barricaded students and make them come into my angles of shooting, that would be the better choice. If you're not willing to do that, if you're going to go to the teachers union and complain, then understand when they say thanks but no thanks, we'll take real men and women who have the intestinal fortitude to do it. There shouldn't be a state law. They just need to say, anyone that complains, you have the right to complain, but we're going to fail you on the program. And this is a sad state of affairs, because it's but we're seeing it in the, look at the military, in the general, I'm not talking special operations, but even in, we always look back as military members and we're like, oh, these guys are getting soft. They have timeout cards and the drill instructors can't call them names. Well, they're calling you names because they're trying to make sure you can keep your composure when the world is blowing up around you. And in the middle of a ISIS attack, you can't hold up a card saying you're stressing me out. And I'm offended. So yeah, it has a funny name, but it has some deep-seated dangers if we allow that to be the status quo. And I would caution Indiana legislators to even listen to it. I would just say, why don't you go home and sit this one out?
Yeah, 100%. So I was actually, when I got that .43 millimeter paintball gun to use in scenarios and stuff like that, I had my girlfriend shoot me with it from about 21 feet.
Mhm.
It was 5 weeks ago. I still have a mark. My finger was, broken, well, fractured and hurt for a year. I have a bruise on my forearm right now where 2 Lamb from Ronin Tactics wrecked me with a non-sharpened steel training knife this last weekend. Like, pain is a good teacher. I can tell you exactly what this bruise came from, and I can tell you that I'll never make that mistake again. On the other hand,
Yeah.
oh, go ahead.
I was just and for those that are listening that maybe this is a new thing to them, there are requirements, especially in NLTA ammunition. You're wearing a full face mask, a ballistic face mask that has, a full head thing on. The different systems require different protective gear at a minimum. So they were just sending these people and saying, well, I hope you don't get shot in the eyeball. Like, they were actually wearing stuff to make sure that the NLTA doesn't turn into lethal, which is very important.
Totally 100%. So I did read in the article exactly what the scenario was. They said 4 teachers at a time were taken into a room, told to crouch down, and were shot execution style with some sort of projectiles. And in another article, it said they basically had them up against a wall with their backs faced to him, and then used a full auto airsoft gun and just sprayed and prayed into them. And again, like, I can kind of understand a little bit, like, I guess that'll probably stick with them forever. I'm not sure I agree with the technique. The sheriff's department has said, hey, look, okay, we won't do it anymore. Doesn't need to be a law.
Yeah, and the worst part about that is, and I would, I'm still curious about because I write curriculum and I'm always looking for points of instruction. That sounds a little weird to me, but I'm sure if I sat down with these law enforcement trainers, they could articulate to me what they're doing, and I would be like, oh, that makes sense. But the flip side is, by the response of if the law enforcement guys signed off on it, then they believed in what it was doing. And I would hope that they had more than just, hey, let's just go spray these guys with airsoft pellets just to giggle. There's got to be a reinforcement of some sort of very important thing. And you don't need to make a law, we're just going to not do it. Well, then that means that they're missing something very critical that they believed in that was going to save lives. And so I guess it comes down to, was it just for giggles? Because if it was for giggles, then don't do it again if it's going to cause a state law. But if you as the law enforcement officers are like, no, this is very, very important that they understand that it's fight or die. And if it's fight or die, and those kids' lives in the jeopardy, and one day they're going to qualify some teacher to be armed, and they're going to just give up and let all these kids get killed because the law enforcement removed that portion of the curriculum because people complained, that's where it becomes unacceptable. If it was not needed, well, then why were they doing it? And so I'll leave it up to the Leo professionals to say if it was needed or not needed. But the response by law enforcement, that bothers me, because my response as the trainer would be like, well, either they can not participate in my program, or I will not certify this program any longer. Yeah. That's what needs to happen.
That's a very good point. And I'll also say, for some teachers' defense here, that I've been a part of probably 100 teachers and administrators being trained in force-on-force stuff. Mm-hmm. And I've never heard one of them complain. They all took their lumps. They all, they took the hits that they took, and never one of them complained. Never one of them whined. They all got right back into it because they're there for a reason. They know what that reason is, and that reason has lethal consequences.
Well, yeah, you're right. And they need to, and there's far-reaching consequences. These programs in Indiana is forward-thinking. They're forward-thinking. I know that the First Lady of Indiana spends a lot of time down at MTAC where we train, and she believes in what they're doing down there. And so it's a very forward-thinking state when it comes to arming teachers. The people that are complaining need to understand that this is why we get buckets of rocks and hockey pucks.
Yeah.
Because a state says, all right, let's do it. Let's arm you guys. Let's get you trained. And they're like, oh, but those things hurt. And they're like, well, all right, we tried. Here's your puck. Make good life choices. And then people die.
Yeah, 100%. We'll leave it on that note.
Sure.
That's going to do it for our time tonight, man. It's been awesome. It's been a great discussion. Remind people where they can find you, and where can they take some of these dang classes?
Yeah, trainmdfi.com. We actually are just getting ready to kick up our live fire season starting this next month. I just got back from the shoot house, and I've been teaching classroom classes, which is always awesome to get back to my old instructor roots. But yeah, we have 70 walk-on classes this year, starting April all the way to November. And then who knows what's going to happen from November to next year. I have to come up with a whole new calendar. But trainmdfi.com. You can find us on Facebook under MDFI. We're on Instagram and Michigan Trainer. And yeah, you know, if you have any questions, take a look at the website, shoot them to me. It goes right to my phone, and either myself or my beautiful better half will definitely get back to you. So thank you so much for having me on. It's been great.
Yeah, it's awesome. As always, excellent conversation. And love the way you think, man. So go check them out, trainmdfi.com, and take some classes. Clearly, in these stories tonight, we realize that more people need to take classes. I know you're listening and you think it'll never happen to you, but it happened to Mas Ayub. It's happened to a lot of people that you never think it would happen to. So go take some classes, get some education, and just become more familiar and better with your firearm. It's that important.
Absolutely.
All right, guys. We'll talk to you next week. Leave us a review either on iTunes, Facebook, whatever it happens to be. If you have a problem, question, concern, anything like that, let me know personally at firearmsradio.tv. And as we always say, This Week in Guns is produced by Kenny Ortega and is a production of the Firearms Radio Network.